I'd like to bring this meeting of the West Allis School Board to order. Mr. Becker, would you please lead us in the pledge? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Suzette, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Burns.
Present.
Mr. Becker.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser. Here. Mr. Keller.
Here.
Ms. Deal. Here. Mrs. Carr is excused. Mr. Sikich is excused. Mrs. Lee. Here. President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any modifications to the agenda this evening?
No changes this evening.
Okay, we'll move right into the superintendent's report.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We'll start with 6.1, the legislative update. So Governor Evers announced the K-12 education initiatives, which will be included in his 23-25 budget proposal. According to the release, in total, the governor's 23 to 25 biennial budget will provide an increase of more than $2.6 billion for public schools, including the second largest proposed direct investment in state general aids since the 95-97 biennium, the largest per pupil adjustment since revenue limits were imposed, and a historic investment in special education. I emphasized the word proposal because it has to go through the entire political process in Madison, but it is encouraging that our governor is also really advocating for public schools. Legislative Council releases a report of study committee on shared school services. So the Joint Legislative Council released the final report of a special legislative study committee that spent much of the summer and fall reviewing current barriers to the sharing of administrative or other services between school districts, exploring the statutory creation of incentives to encourage efficiencies, including school district consolidation, and considering methods for sharing services. The report of the study committee, comprised of both lawmakers and school officials, includes a number of recommendations for legislation, including recommendations aimed at making the school district consolidation process more feasible for districts that may wish to pursue consolidation due to declining enrollment or financial consideration. And there are no updates at this time at the federal level. 6.2 is the Board of Education recognitions. And so first we would like to really say awesome work to the schools that gave school showcases to our board last week. Those schools were Central, Franklin, Hoover, Madison, and Mitchell and Walker. Everybody from the schools really did an exceptional job sharing their learning. Today kicks off Public Schools Week 2023, week-long celebration of families, educators, school leaders, and public education advocates across the country joining together in support of public schools. This week is designated to highlight local public schools, to bring together families, educators, and community members to shine a light on local public schools and share the stories of the positive things happening in classrooms and school buildings nationwide. The teaching and learning in our own West Allis, West Milwaukee schools positively impacts students and families, the neighborhoods and communities they live in, and our nation as a whole. And then from Dr. Stewart, Julie Smith, she would like to recognize Julie Smith, innovation coach at Lane Intermediate School. She did an amazing job coordinating Dylan's coffee shop visit to the West Allis Senior Center earlier this month. Thank you, Julie, for helping me make that happen. I know that the community appreciated hearing from Dylan and Ishnell and their entrepreneurship endeavor. And then 6.3, some brief updates. Based on our last meeting, which was February 13th, 2023, the last regular meeting. In response to public comments, there were comments included that really are in support of our work, and we appreciate all comments that are made, but in particular at this time to hear comments about support. There are also comments about a specific student matter and comments about superintendents, my contract, just so we're clear, it's not the incoming superintendent. So first of all, comments related to the superintendent's contract required a detailed response, and that was provided in writing. And given student privacy expectations, we're not going to comment on any specific student matters in the public space. And then quick update on school consolidation. So tomorrow, February 28th, Lane, Longfellow, and Madison will be closed for students for the day. So teachers can visit schools where we project openings for next school year. Schools are prepared with short presentations for the visiting teachers and will host teachers as they visit classrooms and speak with colleagues. Teachers in the consolidating schools will next receive a Google form to select their first, second, and third choice among the available positions. We will then assign teachers as much as possible to the first and second choices, and repeat the selection process again in April with any new position. We're not closing schools again for visits, but there will be another round as more retirements come in, and we'll again share the available positions, and we'll go through another selection process. Then in preparation for all of this, our leadership team has been visiting impacted schools to keep lines of communication open and to answer questions. And so since the beginning of this month, we have been at Madison, FLW, Jefferson, West Milwaukee, Lane, Walker, Longfellow, and Wilson, and 4 of those were actually visits last week. And there are no other updates at this time, so that concludes the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll move on to public comments for this evening. If you're interested in providing a comment to the board, there's a electronic sign up sheet to do so. If you're in person, you can sign up either via your phone or at the device at the back of the room. If you're watching via Zoom, there should be a link in the chat where you can fill out if you would like the board. Everyone who addresses the board will have 3 minutes to do so. Everyone must start their comments with their name and their address for our policy. There will be no back and forth discussion between the board and those who are providing the comments. However, if there is a simple answer to a question or clarification that can be made immediately after the person providing public comments is done, we will do that. Otherwise, any other comments or necessary reply will be done by the next regular Board of Education. All right, with that, we'll start with Patty Fortune.
My name is Patty Fortune, address 12765 West Hickory Court in New Berlin. When I was here last, I represented 160 households. Tonight, I just represent mine. 7 years ago, we moved to New Berlin after living in Milwaukee, city of Milwaukee, for 25 years. We knew we were buying a home in this school district, but that didn't weigh into our decision because first, we didn't need it. 2 sons were out of high school and our third was finishing up at another high school. Second, we lived in the city of Milwaukee for 25 years. How could any district possibly be worse or as bad as MPS? Well, it's possible. Today, there's a little difference between MPS and this district based on performance and safety. My husband and I are empty nesters, so why do I care about the decline of this district and these 21 students? I hire people. I'm a corporate recruiter and a businesswoman. I've been recruiting since 1995 and have interviewed thousands of people. I've worked at startup companies, Fortune 100 companies, and Global 500 companies. Every day I work with people in India, Germany, Hungary, Mexico, and many other countries. I've hired electricians, security guards, administrative assistants, engineers, salespeople, analysts, and pretty much everything except medical. If a candidate does not have the basic abilities to read and do math, they are much less likely to do a good job or get a good job. Without a good job, they can't pay for rent, food, and transportation. The data from your scorecards tell the story that you are setting up your students to fail, and you are okay with that. But I'm not okay with that, how that impacts these 21 students and future students in my neighborhood. I'm baffled that you continue to increase your open enrollment seats, which means you receive significantly less from the state. Yes, you don't want to decrease enrollment. If you do the math, that means the amount of money you have to educate each student decreases. It's not a good financial decision. I'm baffled about your unwillingness to sell unused or underused buildings and look at other cost savings opportunities. You're making the district house poor. And now I'm baffled that you want to put resources into specialty schools like a Spanish immersion, arts, or STEM when you can't even succeed with reading and math. Tonight, you may vote on our petition. We already know the recommendation is to deny the request. If you vote, I'm hoping there will be 2 people on the board to have some guts and vote yes and let our 21 students and future students get the education they have a right to. Brian Keller, you're a recruiter too. Your LinkedIn profile says you're performance driven. Let's see if you are. Joe Becker, at our presentation 2 weeks ago, I'm told you appeared to care and listen. If you do care, then you let these 21 students and future students leave the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District.
Okay, very much. Moving on to Steve Broadwell.
Can you hear me?
you hear me?
Yep. Okay, Noah, you recently stated your pride and honor with Fair Wisconsin's full endorsement in your reelection bid. You must be aware that they collaborate closely with G-Safe on many projects that are indistinguishable in their goals as part of the militant wing of the LGBTQ movement. Your supporters are now pushing Gender Sexuality Alliance Clubs, or GSAs, into K-5. They provide support to teachers.
Excuse me.
What?
Hello?
Hello?
Can you state your name and address, please?
Then do you want me to start over?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Steve Broadwell. I know you don't know it. It's the first time I've done this, right? Steve Broadwell, 12965 West Ohio Court. New Berlin. Okay, starting over. Noah, you recently stated your pride and honor with Fair Wisconsin's full endorsement in your reelection bid. You must be aware that they collaborate closely with G-Safe on many projects and are indistinguishable in their goals as part of the militant wing of the LGBTQ movement. Your supporters are now pushing Gender Sexuality Alliance Clubs, or GSAs, into K-5. They provide support to teachers in creating these clubs in violation of the Equal Access Act, which prohibits teachers from initiating or participating in student-led clubs. Only an idiot would think kids would be the driving force behind a K-5 GSA without a nudge. G-Safe defines discrimination as school staff outing a student's gender identity to family members without permission. They try to hide their true motives and usurp parental authority using emotionally fragile kids to promote an agenda. Clubs that are supportive are one thing, clubs that indoctrinate another. These confused kids need a good therapist, not a club to more deeply embed their adolescent angst and its true underlying cause. Your supporters are grooming kids at ever younger ages. Gays Against Groomers state it clearly on their website homepage, quote, Gays Against Groomers is a coalition of gays that oppose the recent trend of indoctrinating, sexualizing, and medicalizing children under the guise of LGBTQ. Our community that once preached love and acceptance of others has been hijacked by radical activists who are now pushing extreme concepts into society, specifically targeting children in recent years, end quote. Cutting off a young girl's breast in a ghoulish attempt to relieve her adolescent confusion or depression would qualify as an extreme concept. Fair Wisconsin and G-Safe together are opposing legislation that would keep boys off girls' sports team, which would destroy girls' sports. Fair Wisconsin and G-Safe together are opposing legislation that would prohibit doctors from providing hormone blockers, cross-sex hormones, and bodily mutilation surgeries that would criminalize those doctors that do so for any child under 18. Let me restate that. Your supporters are okay giving young children the same drugs used to chemically castrate sex offenders, dangerous cross-sex hormones, and surgically removing young, healthy girls' breasts because they say they don't want them. These abused kids will need a lifetime of medication and more surgeries to deal with all the long-term complications that arise. You also receive the teachers union endorsement that calls this adolescent transgender insanity normative behavior rather than calling it out for the child abuse that it is. Rather than being proud, you should be ashamed of these endorsements. But like my granddad always said, birds of a feather flock together. That's it.
On. Devin Ray.
Devin Ray, 1027 South 110th Street. I want to start off by saying that I'm in agreement with Patty Fortune, and I believe that the New Berlin residents should be allowed to leave our district since they want to. I also purchased a house within this district 7 years ago and can say that my children no longer attend your district. The district has changed, the district has failed. The district has taken such a plummet in academic scores that I don't blame them one bit for wanting their kids and their residents out. Okay, on February 13th, you had a regularly scheduled board meeting. In the agenda, it was noted that you would be going to closed session. After that, you were supposed to reconvene and address the rest of the items on the agenda. You never did. Those of us that were in attendance for that meeting via Zoom waited 2.5 hours for you to reconvene as planned. 2.5 hours to ultimately be hung up on. We received a notification that the host ended the meeting. At the very least, you could have reconvened to explain that there was no further actions that were needed and that you were going to motion to adjourn. That meeting was not handled appropriately or at all respectfully. After that meeting, I sent an email to ask why that meeting was not finished, got no response. I would also like to bring attention to the fact that Noah has been violating the First Amendment with his actions as on his district social media page. This is a public forum used to spread information for the district and the community, and is also used for his candidacy. He has deleted comments and limited comments to only allow comments from select group members whom he knows support him. This is both dishonest and unconstitutional. Not everyone will agree with you, and people will have the right to say no to you. This does not give you the right to silence and censor anyone. And one last thing. Since none of my emails get answered, I will use this time to publicly ask for an update on records requests that I have requested, since those communications have also been ignored. I have been completely stonewalled by this district, and for what? For standing up for my kid when your staff and you as a board have failed him and multiple other students in your district. This is unacceptable, and I expect a response to these inquiries.
That is the last person that we have signed up for public comment at this time. I will close public comments and we'll move on to item 8, our board reports for this evening. Starting with 8.1, a review of the board calendar. Today is Monday, February 27th at 6 p.m. We have a regular Board of Education meeting. We have a financial stability and efficiency workshop, current people count, 23-24 enrollment projections, estimate revenue limit calculations, and preliminary budget projections. And on Monday, March 13th at 6 p.m. we have a regular Board of Education meeting, immediately followed by a financial stability and efficiency workshop on other post-employment benefits review number 2. And on Monday, March 20th at 6 p.m. we have school showcases for the DLVA, Shared Journeys, West Milwaukee, Irving, Jefferson, Wilson, and Hope squads. And immediately following, we have a closed session meeting. And then on Monday, March 27th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting, immediately followed by a financial stability and efficiency workshop, schools consolidation workshop part 4, and a facility and grounds overview. Moving on to our committee reports this evening, starting with 8.1, employee engagement and culture. Mr. Keller.
All right, thank you. We met on February 21st. We had a pretty full agenda. The first thing we talked about was our draft contract and non-renewal dates. Those will be coming up here soon. Contracts will be sent around March 14th. And I'm hoping to get the acceptances by mid-April. We talked a little bit about yearly mandatory staff training. There's a small amount that has not completed all of it at the time that we met. They have until February 28th, and we're giving some reminders to do so. We also, on February 9th, 37 individuals took part in an update on harassment and bullying training. That included principals, managers, directors, and the leadership and learning team. And there will be makeup sessions for those who were not able to attend. And additionally, 2 compliance officers and district parent complaint coordinators will attend the SHRM workplace investigation credentialing. Our safety committee update, they've been very active. They're going around to schools to update or inventory chemicals that are in use. Making sure the eye wash stations are updated and in good working order. And just making sure everything from a safety perspective is up to date. And then we talked a little bit about this, but in terms of school consolidation and staff movements, there will be a school day visit tomorrow, and kind of working through that whole process with the notification of choices being on April 14th. And that was our committee update.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Keller or his committee regarding his report? Or any suggestions for possible future agenda items? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Keller. Move on to a financial stability and efficiency. Ms. Kaiser.
All right, so we met February 23rd. A couple, I go through our agenda here. OPEB restructuring and survey results, pre and post, and our next steps. So we have a workshop number 2 coming up on March 13th. District staff at the last PD had a better understanding of what the goals are here. Overwhelming positive response to OPEB. And we're going to continue using professional development as a way to initiate discussions with staff and faculty and teaching. Items to discuss: options for investing. We don't want to lose out on the person who joins our district at 50. And where do they fall in the line when it comes to retirement benefits? We did have a concern about equity come up. You know, currently staff who retire with us, regardless of age, are to receive the full amount they have received. What about staff who comes and works for us for 4 years, then resigns, so retires? So we discussed that as well. The preliminary budget for 23-24 will be brought up tonight. And basically, everything we're going to see comes down to the biennial budget decisions at the statewide level. We looked into the Association for Equity and Funding membership discussion. Mr. Becker brought it up to us. It's an advocacy group to fully fund public schools equitably, low revenue versus high revenue districts. We're going to look into membership and see what that is. We have not made any decisions on that at this time. We are discussed the certificate of deposit, so a CD in lieu of money market. Currently, short-term rates are just as good as long-term rates due to an inverted yield. Opening 4 CDs that are laddered. Do you want to add to that sentence there?
That's correct.
Okay. Money market interest rate currently is 2.5%, but a CD monthly is 4.5%, so double. And then that'd be kind of like nice money that we see the need to put something in a school, equity-wise. We can use money from this idea to support a school that needs it at that moment. And then other updates and projects coming up. We have the audit review and action item tonight. Preliminary budget workshop tonight. We have a debt defeasance action item coming up March 13th. We have an OPEB workshop number 2, March 13th. And end of March workshop will be upcoming about school consolidation planning and community feedback. A lot of stuff.
Indeed. Any questions for Ms. Kaiser or her committee regarding that report? Mr. Becker.
Just a comment. Thanks very much for taking up the issue. Apologies for not being able to make it. Day job got in the way.
I did want to say we did have a member of the community come into our Zoom meeting, and people are always welcome to come to committee meetings. We just request that they don't have feedback, but you're always welcome, especially when it comes to our financial decisions and decision making, and it's a Zoom open to the public. So I want to thank the person that came in, and I welcome people to come listen.
Any other questions for the report? Any agenda items to consider for future meetings? I have one actually additional group that I think it would be worthwhile looking into. Wisconsin Public Education Network is one, and I can provide you a flyer, Ms. Kaiser, that I picked up at the state education.
I'm already a member of the group, so yeah,
Okay.
I got it. We'll talk about it.
So look into to see if it's something we want to become a member of. And, it would be a good thing for the district to be part of.
And Ms. Deal is wearing one of their amazing shirts.
She isn't. All right, anything else? We move on to 8.2.3, life readiness through college and readiness.
So we usually, excuse me, meet, what is it, the second Monday, but we actually met the third Monday this month, so February 20th. So a couple things, summer school. So they're already planning and looking at data from last summer. Last year was actually our highest enrollment in summer school, so we want to continue to build on that success. It's partly because we opened it up to everybody, as opposed to it being on an invitation basis. Currently, they're deciding on the length of summer school, 33 or 34 days, and brainstorming ways to increase intermediate student enrollment. So that's the area where we had the least enrollment. They're proposing 2 elementary school sites at this time, Hoover and Mann, and then transportation would be the the kids to be picked up at their local elementary school, which is the same as I did last year also. Math adoption. So there's a math adoption committee got together. They looked at 6 different companies and they decided on 2 options. So they're currently in the process of piloting these programs. The 2 programs they're looking at is Reveal Math by McGraw-Hill and then Into Math by Houghton Mifflin. So they're piloting this in the majority of the schools and the teachers at each grade level. And then each teacher is working with a teaching partner. So one will use one program and one will use the other, and then they'll be able to compare it and decide on what they want to do or what they like better. And then the specialty school survey, there's 2 that went out 2 weeks ago, I think Wednesday. So it closes this week, Wednesday. So that's March 1st. So this, I don't have the updated numbers. So these are the numbers we had midday on the 20th. So last week, Monday. So we had 186 people who had responded. The 2 highest numbers were a 6 to 12 STEM school. And then the other one was a performing arts. Just so people are aware, the options included Montessori, STEM, PBL, project-based learning intermediate, Spanish immersion, School of the Arts. And it actually is kind of cool. I actually filled it out for my kiddo. If you go in, you put in your kid's ID number. And so the questions are generated off of what grade they're in. So like she's in 4th grade. So I got all the questions that apply to like the 6 to 12. You went in for your high schooler would have the options that we would have. So it was kind of cool. Yeah.
Any questions for Ms. Steele or regarding Ms. Kaiser?
Can you just speak on, it's just an asking survey. We have not made any motions toward a specialty school at this time, correct?
Right. This is completely about, this is gauging interest. So again, we're hoping, I wasn't able to touch base with Deidre, but I mean, we're hoping to get about 325, 350 responses. I'm not sure where we're at there because that would give us a good, with some good data. But yeah, this isn't a, we're looking at it if there's interest. It's not a commitment to do it. It's just getting feelers out. Back to the, I mean, we were just focusing on getting the survey out because the goal was to get it out towards the end of January. We got it out in February. So yes, I can certainly bring an update. Yeah.
Based on those results. Okay. All right. Any topics for agenda items for the community for that?
I don't know if it goes for this or for community or for communications. I know there was a discussion about bullying, reporting bullying. And it being on like the front page of our district or on the front page of the school web. Is that a communications thing or is that part a little bit of both?
I know they did move like the forms that are more accessible on our website underneath the parents like tab. So it's more upfront. It's not buried as much as it was previously.
Okay.
And there were some additional things added like the flow chart and stuff like that,
right,
which is out there. So I don't know if it's like right when you land on the pages that I don't think that's bullying, but if you're going into the family, so there has been.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure that was followed up on.
I don't mean that's information I know I have.
Yeah. Yep. If you actually, it's under the parent, or families, if you go in there, it literally says bullying step by step. Click on there and it has everything right.
Anything else? All right. Thank you very much for that report. I'll move on to 8.4, other update information items. Using this to provide it. I'm sorry, 8.3. Board member reports for community event.
I just want to say thank you to the PTA for West Allis, West Milwaukee. It was a wonderful carnival that it was really great to talk to folks and talk to teachers and parents and kids, and it was really cute. I also want to say thank you to Jefferson PTA for their meet and greet last week. It was really nice to chat with folks over there, and next week they have 2 weeks there's a literacy night at their school. Yeah, there's a literacy night next Tuesday that I'm very excited to hear about. I also just want to bring up that Central has a Black History Month dinner and event on this Wednesday, March 1st at 6 o'clock, which I will be very excited to see.
No, so a couple things that I was really fortunate to be able to attend a professional development day last week, the 14th, because I was off of work. It was really a good experience. I'm not a teacher, so I don't know what they're like. I actually was able to, I went to two of them. One was with Dr. Shelley Moore. She does a lot of really great work around inclusion. So that was with the Hoover Mitchell staff in the morning. I actually, didn't want to really tear myself away. And then I went over to Jefferson, where Brian Delgado from Blue Dot was doing a lot of project-based learning work with the teachers, and that was like a really cool experience. Again, it's not something that I've experienced before. So very positive. I actually learned a lot to my field. So that was really cool. I also just wanted to, the PTA Carnival was great. I also attended the Jefferson PTA meeting, so those were fun. But I also wanted to do a shout out to the Walker staff. They my daughter's one of the kiddos being transitioned from Madison over to Walker, and they invited the Madison community to their presentation of learning last week, Thursday. It was really, they had a little dinner for us. There was actually quite a few Madison families there. We got to meet, Stacy, Mrs. Lang was there, Mr. Miller, who will be the principal next year, and just basically just walk. I mean, I've never been in a Walker, so it was just a nice experience to like walk it, to realize it's really not that complicated. It's a square within a square. So it was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who would like to share about any community events that they participated in? Mr. Becker.
I worked at the solo ensemble at Central on Saturday morning at outside the percussion room. So got to interact with some of the kids and some of the families. Saw Principal Summerfield there too, and we had a quick conversation and agreed that there were some clear nerves, but good kind of nerves, and agreed that's really good growth territory. Some of the parents were also agreeing that they were reflecting on their own experiences at the ensemble, how they couldn't really imagine trying it as sixth graders. So it was good to see our sixth graders being pushed a little bit to kind of prepare and just learning how to present on their own. It was a really nice event. Good time.
Awesome. Anyone else? All right, I'll just chime in on going last as it's negatives and that unless I was the only one at something, I can't say anything new. But I was able to attend the PTA Carnival. I was able to 50-50 raffle, which is always great to help raise money for the PTA Scholarship Fund. The fund, which is the main purpose of the carnival, is to be able to raise money for that fund. So it was a great event. It was well attended. So a lot of board members there, a lot of administrators there. Dr. Luxman was there. And so it was a good event as always. And so kudos to them for putting them on that event and for all the schools and the PTAs to come and put a booth together so that kids can come spend their tickets. And the students really love getting those tickets in that little paper bag and see what they get at the end of the night. They had a lot of fun with that. Also was thankful to be able to attend the Jefferson Snowball meet and greet that they had, a community-wide event. Mayor Devine was there. Dr. Lexman was also there as well. So it's good to not only be able to attend that event, but I also was able to interact with some people from Longfellow, some families from Longfellow who were there to kind of get to know Jefferson. That's the school that we're going to be going to next year. So it's a great event as well. And then the last day solo ensemble, I was also able to volunteer at that in the main auditorium there. So all the main string ensembles were performing. So that was great to be able to listen to them. And yeah, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders all performing, as well as our high schools, and doing a great job in front of judges and taking that feedback and being able to grow more. So it's a real testament to music programs that we have here in our district, the strength that we have. You'd be able to start students so young that they can perform the level of work that they're doing and doing it well. Kudos to our music staff and the students, the parents for doing that. Such, it's definitely. Anything else before I move on? Now I'll go to 8.4. Other updates and information items, which is what I was using for updates on our superintendent search, which is now complete. What I do want to say here is Dr. Robinson, we have been in communication with him. He will be coming up to visit the district the week of March 12th, so I think the 13th. So he'll be here the 13th, coming in the evening of the 12th, but then 13th through the 16th, he'll be in the district and meeting with board members, administration, with staff, and I think he's other things too. I don't know if his calendar, his agenda is exactly set, but we'll be attending various things in the district during the time frame. It is his first visit since offered accepting that position. We are expecting he'll come up again, and we'll make sure to try and provide that information as soon as we have it. And then if there's any events that are going to be open to the public or something where the public will interact, we'll make sure to announce that as well, so that those individuals who would like to come and speak with him or have a conversation with him will have that opportunity. We encourage everyone who has that opportunity to do so. Welcome Dr. Robinson and make sure that he welcome to the district and can have interaction with whoever wants to interact. That's the only update that I have about that. So we'll move on to item 9, our consent agenda this evening, starting with 9.1, approval of our minutes from our regular Board of Education meeting on February 13th, our special board meeting on February 14th, and our board workshop on February 20th. The 9.2, our employment summary. Item 9.3, our supplementary contracts, and item 9.4, our financial summary. Does anyone need anything separated out? If not, I would look for a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
And moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Then we'll move to item 10, our action items for this evening, starting with 10.1, approval of our 21-22 audit. Mr. Norris.
Good evening, everyone. So at the previous board workshop held last Monday, the board, in conjunction with our auditors at Baker Tilly, reviewed the 21-22 financial statements. The auditors reviewed the results of their work to express an opinion based on their financial statements for 21-22. They report on audit insights, they disclose material weakness, and made additionally compliance findings. As we discussed, the audit shows that the district continues to make progress on financial operations. The audit further confirmed that we've met and continue to meet our board adopted strategic plan goal to reduce the number of audit findings from 12 to 3, which was targeted by 2025. So happy to report that we've met that 2 years early or 3 years early at this point, which is really great news. Additionally, the district continues to make financial progress in establishing a healthy fund balance. I'm also proud to announce that beyond the audit findings, we've also progressed into our general fund balance increasing to $35,945,557. This represents 37%, just roughly 37% of our total expenditures of last year, which is a really healthy position for a district. Best practice for school districts is 20 to 25%. So having a 50% increase over that threshold is really the marker that organizations look at for credit ratings or just general organizational health. So just really want to state for everyone listening and for the board that we're in a really, really healthy financial position there. And that's just the general fund. That doesn't include all other funds that we have, Fund 50, 46, 80, 27, 38. So given that we've met these goals, I believe that the next step for us is to continue to strive to further improve our financial operations and looking forward to continuing to find ways to meet the needs of our students as well as district goals. So with that, I want to thank the board, our administrative team for all their work and support and the ongoing efforts. The budget, as we've all worked through here time and time, is a collaborative process and many meetings, both with the board, with our administrative team, with staff, to get to the spot that we're in. So with that, I'd welcome any comments or questions.
Just one. We have 3 findings. And can you just speak that we'll always have at least one in one?
Good question. Yeah, so we'll always have at least one finding because we don't internally prepare our own financial statements. And that's really a cost-effective efficiency piece that nearly every district that we work with closely as an auditor or a firm, Baker Tilly is our firm that does that for them. So we'll always have one. And then, audit findings, it's kind of a perspective piece. So for me, obviously the goal is to have just one, given that we'll always have one, but having some is more of a continuous improvement. So having multiple findings that are continuous year to year, that would be not good, right? That means you're not making the changes and making the steps to correct those issues. So both the findings that we had, in addition to the one that you mentioned, President Lee, are new findings. And so we make corrective action plans. And then the goal is that next year, the auditors specifically check on those things to make sure that those things were corrected. And then you move forward. And then, as accounting standards change or financial practices change, things come up, and it's just a good way to mark like, hey, you're making progress, and we have been doing that. So
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else from the board? As I look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved in second. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you very much. Of course. Move on to 10.2, request to alter school district boundaries. And Mr. Norris, you starting, Dr. Lewis?
I am.
Okay.
All right, and I'm just going to pull up the presentation, and we have hard copies of the presentation coming around for the board because some of the numbers will be a little bit difficult to see on the slides. And once everybody has that, we can get started.
Ready to
go. Good evening again, everybody, and thank you to our school board and all of the petitioners related to the petition to detach that may be here listening. First of all, I want to thank everybody for being part of the process. So just as part of the formal record, because there may be additional steps in this, so we're introducing ourselves just so it's all on the record. So I'm Dr. Marty Blexman, the superintendent, and I'll be presenting on this topic this evening with Aaron Norris, our Director of Finance and Operations. And for clarity for those watching, this is not a hearing where the board will engage with petitioners or members of the public. This is the administration's opportunity to present relevant facts and information related to the petition to detach property from our school district, similar to the opportunities the petitioners had 2 weeks ago. And that you'll notice that Aaron and I are following a script, and it's we keep ourselves kind of within reasonable amount of time, but also making sure that we're delivering all of the messages that we think are important as part of the process. So this evening we'll present a great deal of information from the perspective of the West Allis West Milwaukee School District related to a petition to detach residents and property owners who are within the city of New Berlin, but in the West Allis West Milwaukee School District. So as I begin, I want to carefully preface my remarks with an acknowledgement of what I accept as the best intention of the petitioners and what I hope is understood as the best intention of our school district. The petitioners are acting on what they see as being in the best interest of their students and their property. That's a good thing. Unlike the petitioners, our school district must act on the interests of all of the students in all of our schools and based on the interests of all of our property. So with that in mind, and I will say now and later in our presentation that the criteria that must be used when considering a petition to detach includes the impact of detachment on the socioeconomic level and racial composition of the pupils in the affected school district. And it's sometimes uncomfortable when we talk about racial and economic disparities, and we sometimes feel within these discussions that we're assigning blame or assuming motivation. So I want to be clear that we assume no motivation related to the necessary analysis in the matter, and we'll present the demographic facts and the reasonable conclusions about these facts. They exist and are likely to exist in the future.
Thank you for the intro, Dr. Luxman. So for that, welcome. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm Aaron Norris, the Director of Finance and Operations. Our agenda this evening, which is up on the screen, we'll provide some historical background on the properties in question, and we'll then go through the Wisconsin State Legislature criteria for detachment in quite a bit of detail. Following this, we'll provide a summary of the information shared and make a recommendation for action, and then answer any questions our school board members may have.
So what we've learned in our preparation this evening, or for this evening, is that the parcels of our school district that are in the city of New Berlin have an interesting history going back decades. In 1947, a committee was formed in Milwaukee County to explore and take action on school consolidation. There were many small districts, some with only one school, and it was a priority to consolidate some of these districts. As part of this process, the West Allis Common Council annexed territory from the town of Greenfield that included the school district of Parkway. Think of Parkway, our building that used to be an elementary, used to be its very own school district. So the West Allis Common Council annexed the town of Greenfield that included part of the school district of Parkway, and this move split the school district of Parkway. In March of 1954, the school committee received a petition from 154 residents from the New Berlin portion of the Parkway School District seeking to continue in the West Allis School District. West Allis officials opposed this move, but the county school committee took action and a motion was made to consolidate, and that included the New Berlin portion of the Parkway District with the West Allis School District. So that there are active links on this slide and other slides in our presentation where you can find even more details about part of the story and even some of the official records that are still on file. When the petitioners presented, they said they were, when the petitioners for this detachment presented, they said we annexed, meaning the school district, annexed the area, which appeared to suggest that West Allis, West Milwaukee School District essentially kind of grabbed the area, when in fact, the residents of the area asked for the annexation to take.
What is the request being made? So the petitioners are requesting that a small territory of New Berlin be detached from the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District and attached to the New Berlin School District. And we will show more detail on future slides exactly where this lies within our boundaries. There's links in here to the original request and petition, and then also to the petitioner's presentation that was given last week. As you can see on the visual shown on the right, it's an outline of the entire West Allis, West Milwaukee School District, and where the properties, the request for detachment are located. And then on the left kind of shows you in more, I guess, a zoomed in look on where they act, you know, because on the right, it kind of all one circle there. On the left, it's easier to see kind of the individual petitioner addresses, I guess. Slide 7, who are the petitioners? So the petitioners include 160 homeowners and or electors in 4 New Berlin neighborhoods. Our analysis indicates that the request includes 130 total signatures, which is 106 resident properties that were listed among the signatures, multiples in some households, kind of a mom and dad, right, one place, things like that. All 106 residents are confirmed as within the West Allis School, West Milwaukee School District boundary, and these include 21 students who are currently enrolled in our school. So kind of as our agenda showed, the next step is to look at the first criteria as outlined by the state legislature as it relates to geographical and topographical, can always mess that word up, sorry, characteristics with a focus on travel time. The petitioners did a great job of presenting the argument that travel times and the impact on the environment favor approving the petition. We think there's a much clearer way to present this analysis, and it leads to a very different conclusion. So in slide 9, like the petitioners did, we are using for comparison purposes the distance to various schools from the address 12765 West Hickory Road in New Berlin. And we are using the very same mileage numbers they presented. As you can see here, we have Hoover, Frank Lloyd Wright, given that lane is closing, and Nathan Hill High School, and then the subsequent schools in New Berlin, Orchard Lane, Eisenhower Middle, and High. We then take the mileage between schools and annualize the number of miles traveled by a parent with one child attending each of the schools. The small differences in distances between the schools become much more apparent. So you can see if you take the 0.4 distance between that address and Hoover over 171 days, the total mileage for that parent who has a child at Hoover would be 68.4 miles in totality over 1 year. Similarly, at Orchard Lane, it'd be 492, and then at FLW, 469.8. At Eisenhower Middle, you can kind of see the train of thought there. Okay. Then on the next slide, when we take these calculations and analyze them over the perspective of total miles traveled during a school career of a student who lives at an identified address and attends all 3 school sites during their school career, the difference becomes quite stark. Over an entire school career, a student in the petition area will travel 5,984 miles from home to New Berlin schools from that address versus 3,420.6 miles to schools in the West Allis School District. So it becomes a little more clear the total mileage over a school career. Slide 12. Within this criteria and others, the petitioners argue that as a result of our failed referendum, that an additional elementary school may be closed due to school consolidations. The petitioners speculated that this could be Hoover Elementary due to increasing travel times to other West Allis, West Milwaukee school buildings. However, they failed to note that in our facility master plan, in our school consolidation decision-making matrices, we included the criteria that we will continue to operate the schools in the communities that we serve outside the West Allis municipality. This means Hoover is not being considered for consolidation. The petitioners also cited added costs and environmental impact of the additional miles traveled to some of the schools in the examples, but when the miles are annualized, it becomes clear that the totality of miles driven has a much higher environmental impact and cost. And for the reference, we linked in specifically that workshop with the slide reference to that note for the matrices that we referenced.
So, the next slide takes us to the second criteria, which focuses on the impact of the detachment on the educational needs of all of the children in the affected district, and on the impact on the educational programs. Recently quoted our incoming superintendent, Dr. Terrence Robinson, when he said, "You have a lot of work to do." The data makes this absolutely clear, but not universally clear, as the petitioners failed to recognize a critical factor in student and school achievement, which is well known, which is family background. As noted on this slide, with the citation to the source included, there's a quote: "In predicting levels of student achievement, family incomes continue to be reliable indicators." The data supporting this reality go back decades, have been reviewed and verified again and again. On the next slide, there is a significant difference in the economic realities of families served in the West Allis West Milwaukee School District compared to the New Berlin School. Only 13.7% of New Berlin students qualify as economically disadvantaged, while 63.2% of West Allis West Milwaukee students do in the 21-22 school year. We're using 21-22 because that is the information that's most publicly available as reported on the state report cards. For comparison over time, the New Berlin rate in 15-16 was almost the same at 13.4%, while our rate increased by more than 3 percentage points from 59.3. The comparison, reason for the comparison to 15-16 will be clarified in the next 3 slides. The differences in performance of our schools and school district must be considered within the context of these demographic realities. There's no surprise that New Berlin schools outperform our school. The surprise is that by high school, some of our students actually compare well to their New Berlin counterparts and actually outperform them in some areas. So now I'm going to take us into the year 2016, and that's why we did a reference to the 15-16 school year. There was a fascinating article series in the New York Times, and I wish we had updated data, but this is the information that's available. They published an analysis of parent economic status and educational attainment. And you can see from this data display that there's almost a straight line between these two factors. And the educational attainment is on the right-hand side of the graph, and on the bottom is the parent economic status. There are, of course, outliers in any data set, but the trend is pretty clear. Family wealth has an influence on student achievement. And so that's all school districts in the United States are represented by various size dots based on their enrollment. If we go to the next one, what I appreciate about this analysis and the tool that's still available publicly is that you can search for a specific school district, and given the number of students in poverty we serve, in 2016, we were doing about average. So you can see us kind of in the middle, given our level of students in poverty and the fact that we're doing about average. The New Berlin, when we search for the New Berlin School District, the analysis shows that they're 1.7 grades ahead of average. Given, again, the differences in families we serve, that really is entirely expected. So when we drill into more detailed data, we start to see clearly where New Berlin outperforms our students and where there is a surprise in the data as well. Because the petition involves 21 specific students at this time, we think it's reasonable to look at how they perform compared to their counterparts in New Berlin. So our students in our school district that live in New Berlin compared to counterparts of New Berlin students that live in New Berlin. So in 3rd and 5th grade, math, New Berlin students at Hoover outperform all Hoover students, but underperform compared to New Berlin students at Orchard Lake. So you start to get a little bit of a pattern. The same is true for the comparison group students in the middle schools. That's 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And there's a little bit of nuance in the data that Adam helped us with quite a bit because we have different grade level configurations so that the board and everybody listening is aware of that. And then again, at the high school, the same pattern emerges for math. Like I noted, we have work to do, but again, we are educating a much higher percentage of students in poverty. So let's shift to English language arts or ELA. The gaps are not as wide, but the pattern continues at least in the early grade. The New Berlin students at Hoover outperform fellow students at Hoover, but underperform their counterparts at Orchard Lane and New Berlin. On the next slide, the comparison of ELA results for middle school students shows a similar result, but the gap between New Berlin students at Lane compared to middle school students in New Berlin schools is closing now from the previous slide or the earlier years. Then in high school, we start to see a bit of a different picture. The gap closing from elementary to middle school actually reverses in high school for some high school students. In high school, New Berlin students at Hale outperform New Berlin students at West with 57.1% proficient in advanced compared to 52.4. Right, so it's not the same as New Berlin Eisenhower, but we think it's an interesting pattern to point out. Within this criteria, the petitioners also mentioned high teacher turnover, and we don't have that on the slide, but we're trying to address some of the things that the petitioners referenced in their presentation. So we do track voluntary teacher turnover, and voluntary teacher turnover for the 21-22 school year was 18.2%, which post-COVID is about the national average. But as we reported to the board recently when we did the school district scorecard, from July 2022 to December 2022, the turnover rate was 6.9%. So that is trending down. The petitioners also mentioned that detachment will have a positive effect on overcrowding projection, which was curious to us. School consolidation, we're assuming here, but I think it's a reasonable assumption. School consolidations is the reference, and that will not cause overcrowding. The schools receiving new students have had as many and more students in their enrollment in the past. So Waukegan and the students from Madison, they've had higher enrollment than they will next semester at FLW. Had higher enrollment than they will next year. So the overcrowding piece we don't think is actually a reasonable consideration. So the third criteria focuses on whether the proposed detachment will have any adverse effects on the programs from which the territory is proposed to be detached. So the petitioners noted that the failed facility referendum will be the cause of increased class size and program cost. However, we have not made any of these changes, preferring to focus on what is best for students and our teachers by maintaining our current class size target and funding programs that make the educational experience really complete. What this means is that we are not funding capital improvements or CIP to the level it really requires in aging buildings. So there's a trade-off there. With the referendum, we did communicate that if it failed, we would have to consider, class size increases, cutting programs, but instead, what we've continued to recommend to the board, and the board has supported that we don't make those changes, but it means we can invest in everything. Right? And so we continue to try to keep older buildings going. So the reality is if all students in our districts eventually detach to New Berlin, it will mean our athletics will face further challenges to offer high quality competitive programs. Right? So those are things I think that were pointed out. They're fair to either contradict or to recognize. On the next slide, if you focus on the columns in red, so this is really the class size discussion. You can see that the West Allis, West Milwaukee target class sizes are considerably lower now than in New Berlin. Even after the failed referendum, we're committed to smaller class sizes. And on this slide, there's an active link to where we found the source in the New Berlin or the New Berlin class size target. So, and they do a similar kind of calculation. We're not sure exactly if the column that says 92%, which we use as a calculation to determine open enrollment seats, is similar to their column that's 90% because they don't offer open enrollment seats. So that's why we're focusing really on the column in red for class size targets. So criteria 4, focuses on the testimony and written statements filed by residents of the affected school district. So now this is a bit speculative, but I think it's reasonable to suggest that if we surveyed all West Allis, West Milwaukee School District residents and property owners and shared with them the fact of a complete detachment, again, there's some consideration in the criteria for what's called the snowball effect, but we keep talking about if all students then were to detach. So if we shared that with our residents through a survey, that if all of the New Berlin parcels detached, that would result in an increase in the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District mill rate for the school, I think we would find very little support for this petition, right? And again, it's speculation, but we can turn to the two failed referenda that also would have increased taxes as evidence supporting that speculation. So there's an aversion to increase taxes. And if we presented to our community that this detachment would increase taxes, we think it's reasonable to conclude that there would not be support for it. But that being said, the petitioners focused on comments that largely centered around the difference in academic achievement and school safety. So we addressed the differences in academic achievement, again, acknowledging we have work to do, but it's within the context of very different families. In terms of safety, all schools and school districts have challenges in these areas. And the headlines on the slides about New Berlin schools depict it. There's active links there. We could find the same kind of headlines about our schools, so that we all struggle with safety at times. And there's always opportunities for us in New Berlin schools to improve in these areas.
The fifth criteria is related to fiscal impact or effect of the proposed reorganization on the affected school district. The next slide, within the review, financial review, the first area that I want to provide an overview of is the revenue analysis. Provided, as Marty mentioned, the snowball effect, provided that all of the New Berlin students, the portion that attends West Allis School District, would be permitted to detach, this would mean that the district currently would lose 248 resident members, both in attendance and accessing open enrollment. So both students attending our schools and then resident students at choice out through the open enrollment program. Based on the 2022-23 per pupil amounts, this would mean a total lost revenue of just over $2.1 million through both of those current resident members attending and current resident members open enrolling out. The next area I want to review is that of equalized property value, or in my world called EPV. So the total equalized property value for all of New Berlin, again, using the snowball effect kind of thinking here, residing in the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District is just under $425 million. That's the total property value that the district's tax levy is based on for our school district. That represents just under 7% of the total equalized property value for all municipalities within the West Allis School District. Now, it's an important number, 7%, or just under 7%. As I alluded to in the previous slide, we currently have 248 resident members who live in the New Berlin portion of West Allis School District. This represents 3% of our total membership, 7% versus 3%, okay? Should we lose 7% of our equalized property value and only 3% of our resident members, this difference in lost revenue required via membership and our equalized property value demonstrates an overall increase in the mill rate. And if those were opposite, it would represent a tax decrease. So we receive the same amount of funding for one student, regardless of where they come, if they're a resident. But that family's property value might be different in New Berlin, that portion, versus in West Milwaukee. That's kind of the difference. So this is a better visual to show exactly what exactly this impact would be given the loss of 248 resident members and an equalized property value decrease of just under 7%. So on the left column, you can see the current WWM mill rate is $6.55. Using the same current year, the projected mill rate with the loss of the 240 resident members and the equalized property value would be $7.21, resulting in just over a 10% tax increase for the remaining resident families left, right? Similarly, if New Berlin were to add 248 resident members, detaching to their school district, along with the increase in equalized property value, it represents about a 30-cent decrease in their tax mill rate, or just about a little over 4.3% overall. So to me, the best way to summarize the fiscal impact of this petition attached, is to ask this question: should this petition to detach be approved? What would stop the rest of the residents living in the Berlin portion of the school from doing the same? It's clear to me that this slide really kind of summarizes that to show that the entire portion of Berlin detaching from the school district would allow our most affluent families to attend a more affluent district with a projected decrease in their mill rate, and conversely would impact, for the financier, our less affluent families by providing them with a 10% increase in their mill rate. The sixth criteria has to do with whether the proposed reorganization makes any part of the school district's territory non-contiguous. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, contiguous is defined as being in actual contact, touching along a boundary at any point. And non-contiguous is defined as not adjoining along a boundary or consisting of any parts that adjoin. So this slide depicts, similar to what we showed before, depicts the West Dallas School District, West Milwaukee School District boundaries, and the red dots in the lower left corner show the parcels proposed to detach. This slide again kind of zooms in to give you a closer look of where that is in comparison to our district, but also to the New Berlin School District. So this slide here shows in red the residents who signed the petition, and then in yellow the residents who are listed as other parcels that are proposed to be attached but did not sign. So nothing more than a point to make that not every resident on the petition signed it, but there were additional parcels listed that exceeded the 130. If that makes sense. 130 signatures, 160 resident properties, but just kind of a point to make there. So this slide really shows here, kind of to show you how the New Berlin School District, kind of where the overlap is. So in green, you can see the Nathan Hale boundary here. And then in red is the central boundary. And then in, I guess, the purple box here shows you kind of where the New Berlin School District is. And so that kind of rectangular shape shows you kind of where those students are in comparison to the petition. So the reason I showed you that is because this next slide kind of breaks that down a bit. Just kind of an interesting dynamic by indicating here that there actually is a portion of the city of New Berlin that also belongs to the Elmbrook School District. And it, to me, raises the question that if all the New Berlin parcels of the West Dallas School District detach, will some New Berlin residents then prefer to attach to the Elmbrook School District, further complicating this boundary? So you can see here, just kind of north of where our district ends, that section here, that section really those students who live in the New Berlin municipality attend the Elmbrook School District. So that area has some complications that further, I guess, confuse.
Okay, the seventh criteria focuses on the socioeconomic level and racial impact of affected school district. And this criteria opens the door to considering the snowball effect and the hypothetical consideration of what happens to the affected school district, all parcels within the city of New Berlin detached, and not just those in the petition's territory. But as I noted in the introduction, discussing the impact of race and socioeconomic status on the affected school district can be encumbered. But the basic demographic fact of the impact of the proposed attachment and the likelihood of this creating a snowball effect requires that we honestly present a simple set of numbers that shows the attachment is inherently unfair to the students and teachers of West Dallas West Milwaukee School District. On this slide, again, makes it clear that the difference between the socioeconomic status of the Berlin students in the petition and the New Berlin students attending the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District overall is that they are in more affluent households. The slide also makes it clear that there is a stark difference in the percent of economically disadvantaged families in the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District compared to New Berlin overall. The next slide shows the racial demographic of the students within the petition compared to all New Berlin students within the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District, and then also indicate the significant differences in the overall racial demographics of the of the two school districts, demonstrating that West Allis, West Milwaukee is more balanced in its diversity. That'll matter in a few more slides. The next slide presents the same type of comparison as the previous two slides, but now with a focus on the differences of serving students with disabilities. The pattern of the differences remains very similar within the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District, serving a higher percentage of students with disabilities. So there are two primary ways to analyze the impact of the proposed detachment on the socioeconomic level and racial composition of the group. One is the social justice perspective, which presents a problem of simple fairness. The student benefit perspective presents the overwhelming benefit to students of being in more integrated schools rather than less integrated. If all students within the city of New Berlin who attend West Allis, West Milwaukee schools were detached and moved to the New Berlin School District, it is clear that it concentrates poorer students with greater needs in one district, West Allis, West Milwaukee, and reduces these challenges in the other, New Berlin. But more importantly than that, which is the fairness argument, is really the research on the value of integrated schools. So research from the Century Foundation found academic and cognitive benefits of being in more integrated schools. And these include that students in integrated schools have higher average test scores. Students in integrated schools are more likely to enroll in college. They're less likely to drop out. Integrated schools help to reduce racial achievement gap. Integrated classrooms encourage critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. And this slide also includes an active link to the sources of research. And this is just one of the benefit areas that research identified. It goes on in some of the social emotional benefits, but we thought continuing to focus on the academic and cognitive benefits is in theme with the presentation and much of the discussion around that.
The next criteria focuses on the results of any referendum. So during the referendum campaign in 21-22, there was discussion that should it fail, we would likely need to make hard decisions from a financial perspective in order to continue to improve our schools from a facilities perspective, right? We discussed cutting programs. Since the failure of the referendum, the administration and school board have made the decision that we would not reduce or cut programs and have remained committed to our class size targets, which have been evident through the post-referendum have these things changed. What this does, however, mean is that our students will continue to be educated in aging and or old facilities in comparison to regional school districts. We are not investing as heavily in capital improvement needs, but we have a healthy fund balance to continue maintaining our buildings. And I do want to note that we do budget as compared to other districts at a higher rate for facilities, but given the age of our schools, a number of them, it's difficult to maintain the needs that our schools have. We believe that given the financial decision available, this is what is best for our students. This slide again demonstrates that we have not changed our class size targets, and given Marty's earlier point, the planned class max comparison here shows that our class sizes currently, the target is lower without knowing the fill to east for the New Berlin School District. Okay, the next slide. The ninth and final criteria considers other appropriate factors related to the detachment petition. Here we will consider a few other factors. One being fund balance, 2, credit rating comparison, and also explore open enrollment as an option. From this slide, it's clear that the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District is in a much healthier financial position. Just comparing fund balance alone, it becomes clear that having the West Allis, West Milwaukee School having a fund balance of general fund of 37% overall in terms of its overall budget as comparison to the expenditures versus New Berlin School District having 31% or just over 31% using the same comparison. Inside these numbers, it is another indicator of a strong financial planning for the future. The category other governmental funds includes funds such as Fund 27 Special Education, Fund 46 and 49 Capital Improvement, Fund 50, which is food service, Fund 80, which is community recreation. Currently, as a note, 67% of the other governmental funds for the West Dallas School District. So 67% of the $26,728,753, or just under 18 million is our fund balance for Fund 46 and 49. So that shows you the stark discrepancy of other governmental funds in comparison to the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District versus New Berlin. And that's really the board and our collaborative commitment to putting dollars away for future long-term curriculum planning. Per the 21-22 financial statements, New Berlin does not have a Fund 4649, which supports capital improvement. The next slide here is kind of referencing school choice options and open enrollment. So our state has a system in place that allows students to attend non-resident school districts through a program called open enrollment. Other similar programs are available through school choice programs and homeschooling. It's kind of referencing a few different options there. But this is the mechanism that the state has, that it's allowable for students that attend a resident school district to attend a non-resident public option. This is a slide that goes back to 1920. And so this slide shows the overall number of open enrollment seats available in the New Berlin School District by year, which would be the second column. First column is year, second column is, as I mentioned, the number of open seats. It also shows the number of West Dallas, West Milwaukee students who live in New Berlin who apply for these seats in New Berlin and the number of attending New Berlin school. So you can see, using 1920 as an example, that year New Berlin had no seats available. We did have 7 students who live in New Berlin who are also West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District students. And then that year had 1 student who was remaining in their schools at that time. That was new applications. Just because they have no open doesn't mean students can't apply. They still can apply. But open enrollment, as mentioned before, is a lottery process. But from the chart, you can see the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District. Students who live in New Berlin do get seats in New Berlin if seats are available, but that's a limited option. So given this, it's an important question that should be posed around open enrollment related to the petition. It's unlikely that the New Berlin School District will have room for the 21 resident members associated with this petition and the 248 resident members if all of New Berlin territories detached, given they currently have no open enrollment seats available for students under the program.
All right, so on slide 55 is a summary of the significant considerations, and we believe the petitioners provided a compelling but incomplete analysis of the evidence to support their petition. So our analysis shows the following. Travel distances in terms of annual miles and time spent traveling and school career miles are longer for West Dallas, West Milwaukee students in New Berlin if they were to attend New Berlin school. Travel times on travel miles overall would be significantly longer when you annualize or consider them in terms of school career miles. On the second bullet, the differences in academic achievement are largely likely attributable to family income. And it's interesting, in ELA, New Berlin students in our high school outperform some of their counterparts. However, we honestly recognize the overall academic achievement of the New Berlin schools is higher. Wait, not. The petition disproportionately impacts students at West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District, making the district poorer and more responsible for a higher percentage of students with special needs. The petition, if it were approved, makes both school districts less diverse, contradicts the research on the value of integrated school. Class sizes have not increased and programs have not been cut as a result of the failed referenda in West Dallas, West Milwaukee. And the financial standing of the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District is strong. And then what we did as a final slide is to try to present really kind of a very simple display of our analysis. And we'll share this and explain it a bit before our recommendation and responding to questions from the board. So this table summarizes the criteria, whether we believe the evidence supports approval of the petition, denial of the petition, or is indifferent in terms of it consideration. So we believe our analysis shows that 6 criteria support denial of the petition. Those are the location and travel time, the educational programming, fiscal impact, socioeconomic and racial composition of the affected district, the results of referendum, and other factors. or denial of the petition, to support approval. That's the educational needs, so the academic performance, and the fact that the proposed territory, even though not all parcels in the territory sign the petition, they can be included because the threshold is 50% or more of the property owners or the electors of the territory have to sign the petition, which is then makes it eligible to bring it forward. But they did include other properties or parcels that make it contiguous. We those who support approval of the petition. And then there's the one that is indifferent, testimony and statement. Because again, neither of us conducted a quality survey on trying to inform our communities of this and their support given the tax impact. And so that's, I think, a way for us to summarize the analysis. I think it leads well into our record.
So given the totality of the information associated with the criteria for consideration of a petition to detach a small territory from one school and attach it to another, the administration of the West Allis West Milwaukee School District recommends the following. 1, approve a resolution denying a petition to detach approximately 161 land parcels from the School District of West Allis West Milwaukee at all and attach the properties to the New Berlin School District for the reasons presented. And 2, authorize the board president to prepare and include with the resolution a summary of the rationale for the board's denial of the petition as discussed by the board tonight.
And so I want to thank all of you, the board, for thoughtful attention. We want to thank the commissioners. And again, I want to reiterate that we understand they're acting in the best intention of the students and properties. And we understand the criticism of where we are with our parents. We have not bounced back to post-COVID, but reducing the available resources kids who are struggling doesn't help back on track. Those reasons, you have our record in front of you and answer questions.
Just because it was brought up earlier, this is already vote, correct? Already vote 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we were talking about the financial impact, we made the assumption, and I think rightfully so, that it could end up snowballing, include the whole city of New York. But the number of properties we're talking about currently is 161, correct? Compared to 248 total?
That's 248 resident members. There's, I believe about 1,000 total parcels.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for clarification on. Thanks.
Question.
For this group of petitioners and just kind of the whole area, do we have any numbers? We've got 21 kids that are enrolled currently, right? And then there's 52 that are outbound.
Yeah, so there's 248 resident members in the entire New Berlin portion of the West Allis School District. Of the 248, 52 are residents who choice out through open enrollment. And then that's the whole area. And then specifically to the petition, there's 21 students total within that petition that are currently attending.
I was just wondering if we had an age or other, this number of the revenue lost or not lost could be dependent on if our neighborhood and where we or people that would, and at a later date have more students, which would increase kind of that revenue we lost. Well, turnover.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition. Correct me if I'm wrong. What we did is simply kind of stop 1 year snapshot revenue. Because it also doesn't say, well, there's of this 21, 4 are in kindergarten. Now there's another 12 years of revenue, right? So it doesn't calculate that. We have to make some assumptions about how to do it, but both of those get to be kind of interesting propositions to consider. I appreciate the question.
Yeah, this is just. And some of the, yeah, it's a good question, Mr. Burns. Some of the challenge, as Marty alluded to as well, is the state budget being in I guess prelim fashion right now. If the state decides to provide more in aid, well, that changes the picture a bit too for us versus maybe New Berlin, right? So it's hard to do. You're speculating on speculating on speculating. So yeah.
Just a quick question. Can you clarify? There was a comment made earlier that we continue to just open enroll kids to fill our numbers. Can you kind of address that? Because that's what we used to do, but we've made it really conscious. So can you just kind of explain that process? I think that's important to note that this isn't a matter of like if we would decide to say, vote on this and we would say, yeah, they can go. It's not just about that we could just say, oh, we're just going to open up all these enrollment seats. It's not as easy as that, and that's not our goal.
Absolutely, Ms. Steele. So I'm not sure, Marty, the year you might have better to you than me, but I believe like 16, 17 or 17, 18, we changed our process around how we calculate for the number of seats open through open enrollment. So previous to that, whatever that year is, I get it mixed up, we used to add staff to then keep taking students. So essentially the practice was we took anyone that applied and anyone that showed up and we'd hire staff to fill for the number of students that wanted the seats. And since that year, whatever year that is, I forget, we simply staff for the number of students we project, and then any gap that gets us to 92%, that planned max, that's the number of students we have. So actually, it's the converse to that, to the comment that you're referencing, in that we've been declining in the number of seats we have available because through the school consolidation is a great example of that. When you consolidate schools, you become more efficient, meaning that you don't have classes at 19, because if you had an additional staff, they'd be, or you had one less staff, they'd be 22.5. You can't have 22.5 because our plan is 22. So you add a teacher, then when you add a staff, it gets to 19, then you fill seats to get 19 to 20. Does that make sense? So actually, the more efficient we are with having the right number of students in the right number of schools, we'll actually see through the formula less open enrollment students. That's what you saw this year, 181 seats, which we'll talk about in the workshop as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a philosophical practice, and maybe Marty, you want to hit on that a bit?
So the changes came about at the same time as shifting to neighborhood schools, and there are two dynamics. But one was managing finances, driving that. But there's also a dynamic that was emerging of differences between the sides of town and where open enrollment's standing, and so that odd kind of inconsistencies with some schools, 20, 30 old students in the feel like school anymore. And so what we've done through this practice is schools, we really aim at about 10% open enrollment in each school, and it varies a bit. How many residents there are in the grade levels and up to
Siblings.
the 90%, but the target is about 10% balance across the school. Still soft.
If we were to just do what would that lead to?
from a financial perspective, the answer is yes and no. And so the reason it's yes and no is that we are through the revenue limit formula, we're paid for students who are residents. And so if a student's a non-resident, we're paid for the number of days they're enrolled. This is some of the challenge when you kind of, I guess the thinking prior to the year that I can't recall is that like anyone that wants to come comes. Well, if everyone that is there on September 20th or 18th, whatever the third Friday count day is, that's great. But then if 200 leave from that date to the end of the year, you only get paid for the number of days they're there. But the teacher that is not released mid-year. And so that's some of the large scale challenges you could have around, we don't align staff mid-year, nor should I, no, I'm not suggesting we should. That's some of the challenges around that. And so I guess the best I can say is yes and no. But initially, yes. I mean, it can be a financial benefit, but there's other considerations. To a degree, yes. And you also receive less dollars per student. So we receive currently $10,500 per student. For regular education, so you receive just over 8. So you're receiving less in terms of percent than you would as well. But
any other questions? Before we move to action, I have one different.
It's both of them are approximately, which I think allows some variance. So we have the number 160 and the 100
listed here in the online version.
that's the individuals who signed individual homes that were on the signatures. So 130 specific signatures, 106 specific.
Parcels. Okay. But it's 161 in total, just because it would be included if it was approved.
The supplemental, yeah. I think I may have.
So is that an automatic thing, or if we approve, they have to ask do you want to go or no? You have to if they don't want to.
I believe that they're all inclusive. Correct, Marty? Yeah.
So no matter what. Right. It'll be the 160.
I guess I do have a question, even though I think we should know the answer to it. So one of the slides was talking about economic, I guess, 58 of the 196 in Berlin that attended NW. Only one of the 21 that would be impacted falls in that category. So we talk about performance. With the lens that very appropriate, family income does a reliable indicator of level of student achievement. But at the same time, we're making a decision where we don't know the status of those students. We don't know. I mean, we have this data, but we don't know how they're right. So we have to base that off the data that we have and the other information without really knowing what kind of education the students that would be affected have gotten. Accurate.
The 21 students?
Yeah, of the 21 students. We don't know how they're performing, correct?
That is how we presented the comparison.
Yeah, that's how we compared all the numbers.
Right.
I mean, we did it with percentages and so on and so forth, but
Yeah, we broke down the academic data based upon all New Berlin students who reside in the West Dallas School District, not the 21. Yeah.
right.
Yes,
And
that's
my
correct.
point. So
Yes,
you
that's
don't
correct.
know
Yes.
how those 21 impact those numbers specifically.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, but the assumption would be based off of the statistics.
I know.
Is that based on socioeconomic advantage or disadvantage,
That's kind of my point.
that they're probably doing better, except for the possibility of the one that is.
Because here's the thing, and I think I've said this before. I have multiple kids who go into this district. I have a kid who's going to be graduating from UWM with honors in a few months. He's gotten a good education. I know a lot of kids in the school district that have gotten really good education. We have good teachers in our district. We have good resources in our district. Report cards are a snapshot at one point in time based on standardized testing, ELAs, and everything else. And there are so many factors that can go into that snapshot of what that day looked like and what the night before looked like and what their breakfast looked like and all these other things. And then there's also attendance considerations and how that impacts our report cards. We have work to do, yes, but there's so many factors that aren't being looked at when you look at report card scores or test scores. That's my problem. I mean, you can talk about performance. I don't know that we have an accurate picture of performance based on report cards and standardized test scores.
I think among educational circles, and in particular among teachers, you probably find a lot of agreement with that. So I appreciate that. It is the public measure of performance, so it's the one we're held accountable to. So I think it's why we lean so heavily on it in the analysis. But I agree. In the deeper learning work we do that we talk about, it's research that comes out of the Hewlett Foundation. And the question they asked is not how do you improve test scores. The question they asked is, what are the skills that young people need to be proficient in to be successful in life, right? And it includes math and reading, right? It doesn't mean the basics go away, right? So content mastery is the first competency area. That's where we have a lot of work to do. But successful young people that leave us, if they're also skilled in problem solving and critical thinking and collaboration and own their own learning, they're more likely to be successful in life. And unfortunately, none of those things are measured on the forward exam, right? So those are factors that are hard to put into numbers, but I think both anecdotally and in our life experience tell us those things really matter.
Just to close up that thought, again, I acknowledge kind of where we're at. There's a lot of improvement, but I would also say we should always be striving to improve. The fact that the scores are bad, yeah, we have to put a little bit more impetus, or can't talk today, a little bit more focus on that area. But we should always be trying to improve. We should always be trying for better outcomes for our students. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we need to be doing.
Just to piggyback off of that, before COVID, our district was really trending in a really good direction. And I think that the impact of COVID cannot be understated. And the impact of COVID is more on families that have socioeconomic disadvantage. That is just the fact of the matter. And so, yes, we want to improve and we want to do more and do better. That is always going to be the goal, but it's not necessarily entirely unexpected that we might be lagging behind other districts which don't have as much socioeconomic disadvantage to deal with. And if you look at districts that do, they're in the same similar boat as us as far as the amount of catch up that they need to do in preparation for that. So I think all that rolls together, in it, and it can't be ignored. We can't just say, oh, it's going to get better on its own. There's things that we need to do to outside of the norm to make those leaps and bounds. But I think that just looking at that one snapshot and saying, oh, we're doing terrible is a little bit short-sighted in the grand scheme of everything that goes into it.
Yeah, well, I was just saying, I just said too, it's not just on us. It goes beyond the teachers and the school board. I mean, it's the family, the parents. We can only do so much, and we're trying, but some things we don't have control of, no matter how hard we try.
Okay. Well, unless there's any other questions regarding the petition, I think we're going with the language that is in this recommendation slide. So I would need someone to motion and then second. These are two separate motions. So the first one would be the first one that we would have to vote on. If that passes, then we would then have the motion for the second piece. Understand?
So,
If you go to the last slide, this
Okay.
To Kristen.
I didn't realize we're doing 2 action items on this.
yes, there are 2 actions.
Oh, I got you. I see what you say. Okay, so approving a resolution denying. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to motion to approve a resolution denying a petition to detach approximately 161 land parcels from the school district of West Allis, West Milwaukee et al. And attach the properties to the New Berlin School District for the reasons presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are we doing roll call? Anyone can call for roll call if you want. We don't have to do roll call. I don't think that's required. If someone wants to roll call, we can, but we don't have to. All right, we have a motion in a second. Any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that resolution passes. And I'd look for a motion a second for the second part. And you can just read the same thing.
Motion to authorize the board president to prepare and include with the resolution a summary of the rationale for the board's denial of the petition as discussed by the board tonight.
Second.
Motion and seconded. Any last minute discussion or questions on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very much. All right, so that ends the action items for this evening.
Yeah, okay.
So we have a board workshop up next. I'm going to query the board. Do you want to have 5 minutes to? Okay, let's take, I'll go to recess for 5 minutes for any bio breaks that are needed, and we'll reconvene for our workshop after that. We are in recess.
Of expense, we do have actuals for, and so casting that forward a bit and starting to put that together is helpful. So some of the things you hear tonight are going to be repeats from the workshop we had around open enrollment, because that hits on enrollment, staffing, and kind of prelim budget pieces. So we're going to jump in. I think the first half is maybe not new, but the second half will be kind of where we're at, right? So workshop agenda, we're going to talk about membership and enrollment trends, 23-24 membership and enrollment fiscal impact, revenue limit calculation, 23-24 staffing projections, and then really the meat of tonight is 23-24 budget projections, which are really broken out by revenue and expenditures. So this is a nice kind of a visual of our head count within the 3-year membership average. And so as you can see that in blue is our enrollment and red is membership. So they're very different. And so we get funded on a 3-year average for membership. And enrollment is inclusive of every student who attends our school, whether that be an open enrollment student they're considered a non-resident student enrollment, and versus all students who attend our schools who live in the West Allis community. So the reason I show this visual is that the gap in between the blue and the red is really where our membership exceeds our enrollment. And so that's kind of where the decline in enrollment continues. So until that blue and the red meets, really, that's where the decline in membership will also stop too. So, and I'm prefacing that later for the budget because there's some impact in terms of the exemptions that are going to be falling off, non-recurring. So just a nice little visual to show you where we're at. So this is that visual broken down in numbers, right? So membership is kind of an addition of, if you look at actual here, we have 18-19, 19-20, 20-21, and then you can see projections. And let me start on the left side of this chart and work my way right. So we have summer school, September FTE, total membership FTE, and then the 3-year average, which is what we're funded on. So they take the past 3 years and whatever your revenue limit membership is averaged out over those 3 years, that's the dollar you receive. So you can see here as you go across that summer school, it's been, we saw the dip. I think Amy mentioned that in her board report, and it jumped back up in 2022. And so that's good. But as you kind of work down the chart, you can see over time at the bottom, the very bottom, the 3-year average revenue limit membership, which is what we get funded on. That's kind of the decline in enrollment over the past 5 years. And then you can see that 7702 is our resident membership this year. And moving into next year, there's a slighter decline, right? 50-ish students. So the decline is starting to level off, which is good. And so the elementaries have seen that, the middle schools are just getting to the end of that. And so this is kind of phasing into the high schools now. We've had that discussion on school consolidation, things like that. So that's kind of where things are at. And then really for projections, I really don't get out more than 2 years because trends and things like that can change. So it's better to kind of look short term on that. So that's kind of that. So this is kind of another way to look at this. So at the bottom here, I have, how did the loss in membership impact kind of funding? And so 18 to 19, fiscal year 18 to 19, we saw 145 membership loss, which is around 1.52 million. 1920, a little bit higher. But you can see, as I mentioned before, that trend line is getting lower, which means we have the membership is not declining by as much, which means the estimated fiscal impact is going to be less in terms of the revenue limit dollar amount per student. But that doesn't mean our total budget isn't impacted because of the exemptions that we'll get to later. So that's kind of a nice picture of where we're at, but also where we've been, right? So the good news is that once the exemptions kind of are gone and we start from a clean membership, that it'll be easier to plan as a district financially. So that's that. So getting into open enrollment and section size, and we've kind of hit on this a bit tonight, but also at the previous meeting. So we staff for open enrollment and for every student or district based on what we call the 92% plan max. And so what we do is we literally go, how many students do we project in 4K? How many sections do we need? Well, we take the number of students divided by the number of sections, and that gives us kind of an average. And then that'll tell you, so 4K is a good example. We have the desired class size is 18. We have projected enrollments 399. So the desired class size is going to be subtraction of the desired district capacity, subtract the projected enrollment. And that gives you kind of a baseline of how many students can we take. So this year, 181. In previous years, it was in the 200s. So that'll continue to kind of probably level out around that number over time, just due to efficiencies. This has been a topic of conversation among the board as well. Open enrollment out versus open enrollment in. What do those projections look like in terms of net revenue versus net expense? So at this point of time, and this is based on kind of today's, and I make a caveat note there that open enrollment per pupils can change in the state budget. So this is what it is today. So $8,000 for an open enrollment regular education student, that would be $8,000 we receive, or $8,000 we would pay, right? Similarly, for special education students, the amount's $13,000. But you can see at the bottom of this slide here that we have around 700 students open enroll in. It is kind of a rolling number, to Brendan, your question earlier. So it's kind of point in time, right? And so that nets around right around 6 million, because if all those students stay all year, that's right at 6 million. If they don't stay all year, it's a little bit less. Same with open enrollment out, but you can see it's kind of a, about more than double the students open enroll out than in. So we have a net expense there of just under 7 million for that. And that's based on the current levy. So we, as I mentioned before, we receive for all 1,541 students, we receive 10,500, but we pay less than we receive. So that's kind of where we do receive a little bit of revenue for those students, but not much comparison to what we pay. So, okay, so then it's enrollment kind of drives down. So we receive the projected enrollment for the district. Then we boil that down by school to figure out what is the projected enrollment in each school, to determine the section size and sections required by each school to get the number of staff required for that school. Okay, that's kind of the process. So you've seen this slide tonight. This is the district, the school board policy around class size. And so, as I mentioned before, we have the planned targets or planned class max, and then we filter the 92% across all schools. So strategies for staffing efficiencies, really, the goal should always be, and this is getting back to a long time ago with our financial challenges. This was the challenge, right? Aligning your staff to your enrollment is the biggest line item budget we have for salary and benefits. So if we continue to do that, we should be in good shape, pending state budgets that are reasonable, right? So how does that look? What do the strategies look like? We project enrollment. We've historically done a really good job of getting that number within a percent, which is really helpful. And then we forecast that out and try to find historical trends. So we've always seen an increase in ninth grade. So we plan for that. We've seen some increases now from 4K to kindergarten, which we lost due to COVID, so trying to plan for that, trying to make some reasonable assumptions, trying to work with the city more to figure out there's development coming in. What are you seeing in terms of trying to like get ahead of that a little bit because it can help us. A few years ago, we started a vacancy review committee, and that's really due to Dr. Lexman's trying to, I guess, fill through attrition. And so we're working hard to do that, not to have reduction in force as much for staff, which is great. And then school consolidation is an ongoing topic, but trying to be efficient and be caring for that process, because that is a very tedious, but also a very emotional process for staff. So trying to be very careful with that. This is a very complicated slide, but it really kind of guides to show you where we're at in terms of projected enrollment, and where does the projected enrollment, how does that dictate to where we're at with staffing. So my best way to go through it is to just take the top school and kind of work through the chart, so you kind of see how it works. So top left is Franklin. Franklin currently has 11 staff based on the 22-20. So in 21-22, we projected enrollment for 22-23. And that said that they needed 11 staff based on 223 kids. Well, the next column, their third Friday enrollment came in right around the projected enrollment of 223, which is great. Their second Friday enrollment went up a little bit, and based on their projection, they're going to go to 243. So Franklin actually needs another teacher. They need 12 next year versus 11. So you can see all the way in the purple column, they need one more teacher. Okay, that's kind of how it works. I do want to highlight a good example of this. I think Mitchell is a good example. Yes. So Mitchell is a good example. Mitchell currently has 13 staff. Their projected enrollment for this year was 289. Their third Friday count came in at 258. So it came in lower, right? Their second Friday count was a little higher, 260. And their projected enrollment's 264. So you might think at first glance, well, Mitchell's went up by 6 kids. Why are we only, shouldn't we have another teacher? Well, really your 13 staff is based on 289. So, they're net neutral for the year, because you can see their average here is 20.73 without AGR and 20.3. If we cut, they'd be well over 22. So we don't do that, right? So that's kind of where efficient school, the more students in a school, the more efficient that school can run. And that's why, as you get back to open enrollment, you can actually have less open enrollment students by being more efficient. So overall, at the bottom here, you can see through the decline in enrollment, which is marginal at this point, but also through efficiencies, right, of combining schools, there's a net need to reduce 14 staff, which we discussed doing that through attrition this year, similar to past years too. Yep, question, go ahead.
Looking at these numbers.
Yep.
And for most of them, it seems like the projected enrollment is lower than the third Friday count. And sometimes it's not a lot, but sometimes, like looking at Walker, which was 206 and it was 252.
Yes.
Is that because Madison families were going there and that was not included?
Yes, that's exactly it. And so
did we
that
add staff in that instance to Walker?
So and I have to look into that specifically, but part of the challenge was, do we remove staff from the school that the students were going to go to that didn't go to? So in instances we didn't, but I know we did add some supports, and maybe Marty, you know more about that than me.
That we did staff up, so to speak, knowing that we'd have some families start joining a Walker or a Pershing, or we didn't reduce as much coming into this year in the budget preparation for this coming year, knowing some of those transitions. But on the opposite side of that, we didn't reduce in the schools that were declining or losing families that they would have otherwise had enrolled. We just didn't think it was fair to undermine those families. So essentially a Longfellow and a Madison, and a little less to Atlanta, are a little bit overstaffed. Right?
And part of it too is at 252 with 12 staff, they're still at 21. So I think having that little bit of a buffer helps, but yeah, it's a tricky year. We've had those conversations with schools, and we've had meetings with the schools receiving the students to try to figure out how's that going. And it gets difficult because as you get really close to 22, 4K might be really high, but fourth grade might be low. And so that's the challenge with scheduling for the principals. And so in some instances that is impossible to do. And so we have to add if we need to. And, you know, with school consolidations in the future year, that it makes the process that's already complicated even that much more so.
I'll just say that, you know, especially with school consolidations that are happening this next year. Dr. Luxman doesn't have to worry about this, but I guess I'd like to keep a good eye on, you know, these enrollments to see if we do see a big change, especially in the schools that are taking those students, because I want to see that transition as before. We'd like to see that transition to be as smooth as possible, which I know with the understanding that it's not going to be, you know, 100% smooth, but I really hate to see like, oh, not only are we getting all these new families and new students, but also now we have, you know, our class sizes are all bigger because we're at a higher level than we were expecting to be. And we're going to have to now fight through all of that as a staff and as a building when we were, you know, I want to see that to hopefully be a good, coming together two communities and seeing that growth happen.
Thank you.
And not be like, I got 28 kids in my class and I can't, you know, you can't do
on top of that.
Right. Right.
And so the one thing I will highlight in orange is really where you'd want to look here. So in orange, you can see elementaries. Nearly every elementary, with the exception of Wilson, is under 21 as an average. So having that buffer in there is, it's kind of built in with AGR. It kind of bakes the cake a bit, right? Because there's some classes at 18, some not. But then if you go to the yellow, you can see some of the schools are a little bit closer. But as a building, the AGR piece there is some flexibility there. We've had some schools where, hey, we plan to run 4 AGR sections. AGR carries over with grants. We don't lose the money. So we're gonna run 3 this year because we need to not have 18 or things like that. We've been able to manage that a bit, but that's a good point. Yeah.
I just wanted to note that Docky nearly doubled. Or was that a surprise to us or?
No, because they opened.
Oh,
remember we were building on it. So like, I just know this because I have my kiddos going in there. So yeah, they just opened it up to like, they built it up to.
Yeah, Docky changed their philosophical approach from more of an at-risk to project-based, and so phasing the students.
Thank you.
You know, kind of that approach. So.
Makes sense.
So then this is kind of where the complete picture here with consolidating schools. There is some additional staff, I guess, efficiencies there. So that kind of shows you like where we likely could end up, and certainly not something that we are required to do, but that's kind of where we've started to look at in terms of positions in schools that we, you know, you don't need 2 principals, now you need 1, things like that. And so Marty and Deidre and the team have looked at trying to, through the last few years, consolidating positions and having, maybe you want to speak to that a bit, Marty? I don't know if that's something you want to hit on here.
Right, because as you consolidate schools, again, you become more efficient and really managing carefully open enrollment to make sure we're maximizing students in seats that are available. Allows you to operate in a way that, you know, produces budgets that don't have a fiscal cliff in them or a structural deficit in them, like you hear in headlines from so many school districts. But part of our commitment in the transition, and we've said this in all of these school meetings over and over again, if as a result of school consolidations, normal attrition doesn't provide enough positions for everybody that's being displaced, we're going to make positions. I'm going to use ESSER money to do it. I think it's the only fair thing to do to teachers that are being displaced. It's very unlikely that we need to make positions just because normal attrition tells us there should be openings for the teachers that are displaced from the 3 closing schools. But I think it is an appropriate kind of both personal and professional commitment that we make to the people that work for us. And if there is an extra 3rd grade teacher somewhere, well, then we can reduce class size somewhere for a year. Just make it really clear it's temporary, but there's an opportunity to invest some ESSER money and support some of the achievement gains we need to make.
And some of the things here too is how my brain works, which is what's here, right? Is like school consolidation. You know, you think administration, support staff, custodial, those are kind of the things that you reduce. Like 4 of those positions are contracted services. So Steve Eichmann and his team, through attrition throughout the year, instead of hiring a brand new cleaner for them to be reduced by contracted service for the year. things like that. So reducing contracted services through Sodexo and through, we have a Peachy Clean contract that we use. So some of these aren't actual people. Does that make sense? So there's no need for the service now. And so things like that. So.
I'd like to, I'm sorry, Mr. Burns, you had your hand raised. I want to give you that opportunity.
You can go too. It's fine. No, the question I was gonna have is if we do have quote unquote extra staff because of how this goes, I think it might be also good to look at if it's temporary things, is maybe to look at some of the opportunities in the administrative offices, because we have talked about some other kinds of positions that were short term that we're talking about taking up and getting stuff. So rather than bringing someone new in, if there's a teacher that wants to get some of their administrative trainings, get some more leadership kind of components to go into the administrative offices to take a short-term piece while we're still transitioning, and then we'll go back to the classroom later. But that might be also because we've talked about some extra work done to do that, plus that would offer leadership and experience and anything else.
I appreciate that.
I was just gonna say, like, I like the use of ESSER dollars in this regard. Like, one of the main uses is supposed to be to help with achievement. And I think that reducing class sizes is definitely something that has been shown to be able to help with achievement. I think it could help with some of the behavioral issues that we have. I can think it could help with a lot of things. If we have smaller class sizes that someone has to work with, or another person in a room that would normally be there so that they can, support the other staff member there. So I personally would encourage the use of ESSER dollars in that regard. They're only here for a year after this one. And so, I think reducing class sizes is a great use of that money.
So then getting more into kind of that kind of leads us into the state budget, because this is the prep work that we do as we lead up to the state budget. So as you all know, 23-24 is the first year in the state's biennial budget. So it's going to carry for 2 years, 2023 through 2025. And at this point, there's fewer known factors early in the budget process. That means really our budget's in flux until, really until Joint Finance Committee meets in session, and that doesn't happen until the end of April, typically early May. So what are the assumptions? And so these aren't things that I just dream up. It's in conjunction with local area districts, and it's the ongoing circle debate around what do we think they're going to do? Why do we think it? What makes the most sense to you? How does that impact? What are you hearing? Things like that. So where the ongoing thought is that something will be done. That's kind of, we all agree, but the agreement amongst most school district finance departments is that whatever's done, the revenue limit will be offset in the per pupil as to not impact property taxes, because that's what they think the legislature will agree to. So the conservative estimate at this point is that $200 per pupil per year would be increased, and then $100 initially in per pupil categorical aid, and then held even in the following year. And I'll get into Governor Evers' budget proposal in a minute, but then also I think there could be some bipartisan support for increasing special ed funding. So currently it's just under 30%, so increasing it to 35 he's asked for 60, so I think that's something will get done, I think. So that's where most districts have landed here. Additional state budget factors, other questions that are being asked, as I mentioned before, the increase in special education funding reimbursement rate up to 60% is the current ask. That would be huge for us. Each 5% represents around $600,000 for us. So just going from, I think it's 20.5 to 30 would be around $700,000. So it's real money for us. It's a big deal. I think there's some real support for 4K being fully funded. I don't really see a bipartisan reason not to do that. So I think that's an option. I don't know if it'll go full. Currently it's 0.5 or 0.6, depending on if it's full day or half day. And then really open enrollment, the school choice perspective is there's a lot of support in the legislature for more school choice options. So I think that would happen. I think that those numbers will get increased. So to be determined here really on revenue. So expense assumptions, 2 slides here. So really we have some knowns and some unknowns. Okay. So health insurance, we have a 2-year rate lock. So next year's a 5% increase. So you're like, why do I see 2.5%? Because health insurance is over the calendar year and this is the fiscal year. So we're going to see this, the back half of this year, we're going to see the first part of our decrease in UHC. And then that'll carry us all the way to January, which is the first half of next year. So the 5% increase actually starts next January. So half of the year we'll see the 5%, which is a 2.5% increase over the budget. Dental, Brown and Brown has advised around a 5% is a conservative marker there. That's historically what we've seen, historically what we budgeted for. Transportation is still, we're still in the works here. We have a contract that dictates 5%, but then there's also going to be some additional buses with school consolidation. So really working through what that looks like. 3 is a guarantee at this point, 4 is up in the air. So each bus is around $50,000. So right there, that would be 150 to 200 plus the increase. So that's that. And WRS that already increased, but that's the employer contribution piece from 6.55 to 6.8. Other assumptions, as you probably likely know from your own homes, utilities have exponentially gone up. So 7%, that really actually is overall, 15% for gas, 8% electricity, 1% water. And then we also took a 20% reduction in schools being better consolidated, just because you don't heat to 70 degrees, you heat to whatever that is. So that's, we met with Steve and looked at that, and 20% is what we thought was reasonable. So that includes that as well. Including at this point, just for a number here, matching what we had last year. So in CPI, that's just a consideration at this point, but a place to start. So 4.7, school budgets funded at 75% per our formula using second Friday count. And then this prelim budget also includes a debt defeasance strategy, which the board will hear on March 13th, which is around $1.5 million. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the debt defeasance strategy is, but current projected budget using the revenue assumptions and the expense assumptions puts us with the debt defeasance strategy of just over $1.5 million currently deficit. Without the debt defeasance strategy, it's around $3 million. And so to get a little bit deeper into what the debt defeasance strategy is currently we have around, we have in our budget expense line for non-energy efficiency 38 debt around $1.5 million. So currently in our Fund 38 account, we have just over $3.7 million, and we only have a total of $4.6, I believe, million in Fund 38 non-energy efficiency debt. So on the advice of our financial advisor, they said, hey, you have dollars set aside in Fund 38. If you can pay off, put your dollars into a debt defeasance fund, it's kind of an escrow account for non-callable debt, you actually will save $250,000 due to the interest you'll earn on the account that they guarantee. So it's an interesting strategy. A lot of districts are taking part in that. What that does for us from a budget perspective is the $1.5 million in expenses that we would have had next year, we won't have next year. So you're kind of like prepaying the debt. So it's a strategy districts are taking given the interest rates and given some of the rate locks they can get, especially with the unknowns in the state budget. For us to be in a better cash flow position, it's to me an easy win and save $250,000. But you can see the difference if we did or didn't do it. So more to come on that, but that's currently where we're at. And then I was like, well, what happens if for some reason the legislature passes Governor Evers' proposal? What does that look like for us, right? So this is the revenue assumptions are the big difference. Our expense assumptions really, I mean, they are changed based on what they do, right? But this is kind of what the revenue assumptions look like. So we assume 200 in the revenue cap each year. Governor Evers has asked for 350 in the first year and 650 in the second year. We assumed a little higher on categorical aid. He asked for 24 and 45. We asked for 100 up front. So like, why did we ask for more? Because that's the offset of property taxes. I don't think for that reason alone that'll happen because that's going to increase property taxes, right? So that's the thinking. And then currently he asked for 60% in special education reimbursement aid. So you can see a net surplus of just under $2 million if that budget were to be approved. So then I was like, well, let's break it down, not to get too deep into this, but to show you kind of where this comes from. And so I really want to focus just for the purposes of this evening, really on the revenue side to show you kind of like $200 in the revenue limit doesn't do a lot for us. And here's why. Okay. So the first one under revenue, I'm just going to use my mouse here to kind of go under here. Revenue limit reduction. And this is really declining enrollment. So the less students you have, you get less money because the multiplier is 10,500 times every kid. Well, if you got less kids, you get less money, right? So what's that mean? And you kind of saw the 500,000. Well, that's the projected enrollment puts us at $600,000, right? Okay. Then the hold harmless reduction, the hold harmless is a non-recurring exemption. And so what that really means is last year you had $100, this year you have 80. Hold harmless is 20. It's the difference. So whatever your revenue was last year, whatever it is this year, if it's less, they give you the difference. Right now, if someone comes along and says, hey, you had $80 this year, we're going to give you 30 more, you only actually got $10 more because they took the exemption away. That's kind of what that is. So when you see where it says revenue limit per pupil increase $200 assumption, 1.5 million, it's because $166 of that is an offset of the hold harmless exemption. So if the state said, we're going to give you $166 more per kid, we actually would be net even. We'd lose the exemption and we'd be washed even on the revenue limit. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And then also there's a second non-recurring exemption, which is declining enrollment, which says it's just a soft landing spot for districts as you need to decrease expenses due to your declining enrollment. Here's some additional dollars. And as you level off, that's the 3-year average in membership, right? So if you had 8,000 kids 2 years ago, now you have 7,900, now you have 7,800, we're going to fund you at 7,900. You're going to be the average. So as your declining enrollment starts to level out, this exemption number starts to decrease, and really when it hits zero, then it's easier to plan. But you can see overall in revenue, $200 with these assumptions, and that's just around $600,000 additional revenue. So not a ton, but you can kind of see where that comes from. And then the expenses that I listed, these assumptions, you can kind of see in detail what those would cost. And the only one I really want to hit on tonight is in the expense listed here, you see one kind of expense reduction, and that is what is called a one-time prior expense reimbursement, really from DPI. And so what that's for, it's really interesting. It's really difficult for us to plan for, but what happens is in open enrollment third Friday, we receive how many kids are open enrolled out, right? So that happens, and that has to be reported by October 1st. So we report that by October 1st, and then we have the option to amend later, but the amendment, like the check's already written, right? So when you amend it, it helps you in future years, but what about this year, right? So what happens is primarily Milwaukee will have students that they'll say, hey, they were enrolled all year. Well, they found out in December that they moved to West Allis in July. Well, we didn't count in membership, so we amend it, but then the state goes, well, how many kids did you not count in membership that you should have? Well, that's what that number is. So we receive kind of a one-time expense reduction. So that's why it's in the expense line and not revenue. And that ranges, but it's lived the last few years here around 1.5 million. So, it is what it is, I guess. I wish we could clean it up, but it's nothing on our end. It's really an issue on, the magnitude of Milwaukee, really. I think it's the problem. So overall, you can see kind of expenses and revenues. And that's the 1.5 with the debt to fees piece. So the question that I usually go to is, all right, now we know what we know, assuming revenue, that's what it is. What can we do? Okay, so this is kind of the strategies pathway to meeting a balanced budget, essentially. So really the first thing is these are conservative estimates and assumptions on pending state budget revenue. That's the first thing. So as we know more, like I said, 35% in sped revenue or reimbursements goes to 40. Well, this just got cut in half, right? So as things come in, we'll know more and hopefully soon, but not likely. And then we talked about staffing. So, really keeping a pulse on having the vacancy review committee watch retirements and resignations and having meetings internally to make sure where are we putting positions where there's needed and things like that, and trying to manage that. Use of federal funds, ESSER, if we need to balance the budget. We haven't historically been doing that because that's what we don't have a fiscal cliff. So that's been good. And then, as I mentioned before, actions to reduce shortfall. We have the debt defeasance proposal, which will be coming in March, early March. And then, if need be, that's where in prior years, you probably can recall really getting into the details and scrutinizing budget line items, which we haven't had to do in previous years, but that's something that if you had to do, that's where we'd land, right? If everything kind of shifted that way. So this is kind of a picture, kind of an ESSER overview. So you can see ESSER 1 is there's nothing remaining. It's gone. The claim dates pass at gear. And then in ESSER 2 and 3 are really the next 2 years. This is ESSER 2 year, ESSER 3 is the following year. And then ARP is additional homeless dollars we've received through the state of Wisconsin. Kind of a planned projected expenses for ESSER. So you can see ESSER 2, this is kind of the proposal we have here that was based on the board approved plan for ESSER. So computer refreshes, we have the teacher retention bonuses we paid out of ESSER. We were able to purchase, or not purchase, but pay upfront for leasing this year, which is great, the last few years, which is great, saving the district lots of money in terms of not having to pay as you go, purchase the lease up front, you get like 15% reduction. That's really great to have. Additional security, playground equipment, cleaning supplies, panorama, custodial equipment, and then ESSER 3 this year, the facility staff, and then that's really where the board was able to shift dollars into Fund 46, right? That's, you know, an option through ESSER to supplant. So we've been doing that to be able to provide dollars and things like that. And then learning loss, that's where the math curriculum is as well. And then student device refreshes, Apple computer lease, the second one, and then the HVAC project that Steve had worked on. Okay, next step. So really we're watching at this point for the state budget updates. At this point, we have our next budget, prelim budgets in early April. Should the state not get into joint finance committee by then, we may want through the FSC committee look at pushing it back a bit to wait till we have more knowns, but that's currently where we're at, watching for that information. And then really as information comes to the state, building scenarios and the information kind of leaks. And so we try to get as much as we can, as fast as we can to build scenarios. And then really continuing on focusing our staffing through the projected enrollment, and then really getting into budgeting for other funds. So 46, 50, future 73 for an OPEB retirement trust we talked about, and then 80, and then identifying priority items to support in the future year and district goals. And that's that.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any questions from the board?
Just a comment, like I made in our committee meeting, it's normal to have a deficit now. We've made it work every other time.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure for people watching it, it's not a thing that is terrifying.
Right, we don't pass the final budget until October. So by then we would conceivably have all the information we need to do so. But yes, now and in June, when we have to pass a preliminary budget, even that a lot of times also has a deficit in it, because if decisions haven't yet been made yet at the state level, you still just kind of don't know. You don't need to start slashing things in a panic until you really know that something is necessary to be done or not. So
yeah, it's a good point to make, Kristen. Yeah, thank you for that.
Any other questions? All right, well, I guess we'll look for somebody in the legislature to do something, and then we can figure out what's going to happen from there.
And as I know more, I'll continue to put that in board updates and things like that to show you, hey, we heard this today, and this is the impact, right? So I'll continue to put that in there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Norris. Check my thing here, make sure everything else. Okay. All right. I look for a motion. Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.